I'm really pleased to welcome you to the AFRES Summit 2024. This year is AFRES's 20th anniversary, so we're going to be spending a bit of time looking back and looking at some of the progress that collectively we've achieved over the last 2 decades, exploring some of the challenges that everyone is facing in the here and now, and then, of course, looking to the future and thinking about some of the activities that we need to pursue to achieve a sustainable world. I'm really excited to be joined by our first speaker for the summit, Rishi Kalra. Rishi is the founding co-chair of our CFO Leadership Network in APAC and has been involved in AFRES's work for over a decade. He's currently CFO of OFI, which is one of the world's leading food ingredient suppliers. And if you haven't heard of OFI, you almost certainly have eaten some of their products. So a major supplier of cocoa, coffee, dairy, nuts, and spice ingredients. And Rishi has really led a lot of the work that OFI and many other organizations have done in terms of embedding sustainability into the heart of decision making. So Rishi, it's a real pleasure to have you with us for the AFRES Summit. As you know, it's our 20th anniversary, so I'd like to start by looking back and reflecting on some of the progress that we've made together over the last 2 decades. And you've not only been a really leading force for change within Olam and now OFI over the past 2 decades, but across the entire Asia-Pacific region. So can you say a bit more about what motivated you first to get involved and to start taking action, which was really a long time before many others were?
Thank you, Jessica. And first and foremost, my heartiest congratulations to the whole A4S team and the community for completing 20 years, and which I'm sure we'll all realize in this space is equivalent to more than a generation. So I think it's a great journey and 20 years for A4S. And I'm also very pleased and honored to have been part of this journey for not as long, but a reasonable period of this time frame as well. Coming to what you asked, first and foremost, as you know, sustainability has been the heart of Olam, and much before it became a buzzword. As a purpose-led organization, it has been part of our DNA from the very onset, and that's really set the tone for what we do and how we behave and deliver across the globe that we operate within. And for us as a global food ingredients company, it has been a license to operate and differentiate. And while we were always the early starters, but we felt and realized much earlier that doing good and creating value can coexist, and that value creation must be equitable for all stakeholders. It was not about just doing good. We also, as a commercial organization, realize that if we are trying to do good, we can create value for us and also the communities and the farmers that we operate within. If you look at from a farmer yield standpoint, for example, productivity and livelihoods, if they were improved, we as an organization were also benefiting from a larger share of what they were producing. So for us, it was always par for the course. It was important, it was needed. And we realized that if we did it right, we all benefited from the small farmers, stakeholders, and also as a corporate ourselves. And as time has gone, and we all know very well that the risk of inaction also has become even more difficult. If we don't do the right things, the impact on our business, especially from nature, climate, biodiversity, have only become more evident. So we were early starters. It was important for us as a business, but by not doing it anymore, it only adds to the risk that a company can take. So this is from a corporate standpoint. But if I look back and think about my own personal Damascus movement, and I remember it so vividly, this was the year 2013, when I got an invite by His Royal Highness Prince of Wales at that time for a meeting of A4S, and that's where I got to sit it with A4S to start with. It was really being intrigued by the invite, like I'm sure any others would. Fairly excited about the opportunity to go and meet His Majesty, who was the Prince of Wales at that point in time. And I was quite impressed with His Majesty's vision and being so ahead of his time at that point. While the call for action at that meeting was more to get CFOs, and I remember him saying that he's been speaking to the CEOs and asking them that why they're not doing enough on sustainability. And the CEOs were complaining that the CFOs were not giving enough money to them to spend on sustainability. And his call for action was that rather than going around circles, let me get the CFOs in the room and get them to commit on sustainability. While the call for action was only to loosen the purse strings, to be honest, it got me thinking that there is a clear role for finance in sustainability, and the role that A4S was playing in this journey was incredible. And as an organization that was already acknowledged as a leader in sustainability with a co-founder and CEO who was at the forefront of driving change, I came back, reflected, spoke to my CEO, and felt that while the call for action was to loosen the purse strings, but is there a way that finance can really make a real impact in our industry and see that impact coming through from real action? And like they say, rest is history. There's a lot that we have come across in the last 10, 11 years, even from a finance standpoint within Olam and OFI now. And so it is clearly remarkable. And I'd like to thank A4S for one, having invited me, to His Majesty for having shown that direction and vision. And very glad that while it is still, I keep saying, in this space and age, it is still very early, but been happy and proud in some ways to have played some part in this journey from then to now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as you say, it was sort of just over 10 years ago that we first set up the CFO Leadership Network, and you were there at right at the beginning, which was already 10 years or so into our A4S journey. If you think of the role that finance has gone on over that period, can you say a little bit more about how you think the role, whether as a CFO or your finance team more generally, what has changed and what have been the key drivers that you think have really accelerated momentum?
Sure. So it has been amazing the way this has changed. And if you reflect back the last 10, 12 years, when this journey started by some companies, it was more about being a leader and having an option. And then quickly it moved into becoming a need because there was an ask coming from investors and boards that every company should be focused on sustainability in some form or the other. And as we stand right now, it is becoming not just a need, it is becoming an expectation. Regulations are coming along, and the role of finance has to have to partner in this journey has also become more important. So anybody in finance, whether CFOs or otherwise, who could earlier stay away, like I said, it was initially the role of the CEOs, but with it being regulated now, the needs coming from various aspects, it has become really one of the day jobs of a CFO now in ensuring that they're able to not just provide governance, but also ensuring that it is done in the right way. So I talk about if I was to think about some areas where it is becoming more relevant from finance teams now. First and foremost is the governance and accountability. As in when these standards are coming along, the regulation is taking place. It is important that they are able to play an active role in not just defining but also ensuring the reporting, the requirements are all met to fore. Second is integrating sustainability into financial strategy. It is impossible that we only look at from a governance standpoint unless it can be delivered with real action on the ground. Whether it is in financial planning, risk management, investment decisions, all are really responsible to the CFO. And if the two have to be integrated together, financial strategy and sustainability, it is really at the heart and center of the role of a CFO. And again, that has changed and moved much, much and very fast in the recent times now. The next one, very important, is the reporting disclosure requirements. All the standards and requirements that are being coming and expected of every organization now, listed or otherwise, again falls as a responsibility of the CFO. So they have to ensure that the governance around it, data rounding, and reporting requirements are well understood by the larger organization and catered for. And last but not the least, I keep saying this, it is really about capital allocation and sustainable finance. It's an opportunity as well. How do you allocate capital to the right places? How do you ensure that as an organization, you're becoming more sustainable for the future? And more importantly, use that as a differentiation and an opportunity to also raise capital, which comes at clearly much cheaper pricing too. I think the role of finance has changed so dramatically over the last few years. And I'm quite happy that the CFOs and the finance teams now not just play a side role, but a very active role in the boardrooms and otherwise to drive this change.
And if you think of then, so back to that original call to action from, well, the then Prince of Wales, now His Majesty the King. If you had to report back to him, what would your report card say? Would it be 5 out of 10, 10 out of 10? To what extent do you think the CFO community has really shifted in the kind of way that he was calling for back then?
It's interesting way to ask that question, Jessica. It'll be unfair to put a number to that, to be honest. I think first and foremost, I'd like to acknowledge that I've always maintained that it was visionary on his part to have not been only thinking about sustainability, But getting the finance team aligned and setting up of A4S was so much ahead of its time. Today, we are seeing the need for that emerging. And I'm glad it is not about how much do we score, but what is important is that if we had not done this, if we had not set this together, it would have been so much more difficult today to work on things that are becoming par for the course, like I said. So I think we can all pat ourselves on the back, but the biggest applause and the credit goes to His Majesty, the King, for having seen this and thought about it so many years before anybody else could.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as you were acknowledging right at the beginning, that there's still a lot of work to do. So definitely not job done. And I guess to that end, over the last few years, one of the things that we've been working together on is setting up the Asia Pacific chapter of the A4S CFO Leadership Network. So can you say a little bit more about what the value of that network is, and how it helps you as a CFO and some of your peers who are in the room to drive action?
Sure, no, I think it's been like we all know, it's been a journey, and this is an ever evolving and fast evolving space. There is so much to learn and grow and improve with. And I think that is where the whole CFO Leadership Network provides a framework and a peer network where you can both understand the challenges in real life scenarios, use the tools that have been already provided for, and help in adapting and adopting to what you need in your own organizations. So for me, it's been a great, for me, having just the CFO Leadership Network, the peer group available and accessible has been a great opportunity. And like you were saying earlier on as well, there's so much to be done. It is not about whether you are good, whether you're bad. It's not about whether you know everything or not. It's about, are you in this journey and are you able to learn, grow, and improve? And for me, that has been incredible. And as what A4S has put together, not just from the leadership network and the other peer CFOs that one interacts with, all the guidance material that is there already existing on the website, and otherwise the training material that gets used. We've done it in so many ways in our organization too. And more recently, our team launched the CAPEX ESG framework, and most of that was used and leveraging upon the content that already exists. The A4S Academy, again, it is such a brilliant idea, such a great access that the leadership network has, and people beyond as well, so that we can have more finance team members, one, being aware, and second, more engaged in this journey, because this can't be only done by a small team. The larger organization has to come together. So I think it is again great to not just the vision of setting together A4S, but the way this was all set and put in place in real action, whether it is a leadership network, the academy, or the tools and guidance that has been shared and made available, has been remarkable for us.
No, it's really, I think, great to hear that. And as you say, the different types of approaches that I think, we've only been able to do by working closely with organizations like OFI, who've shared some of the challenges, but also the approaches that you've been developed. And a lot of that guidance and the material and the training is really that by finance for finance type of mentality. So it enables people to take action. But one of the areas that I think OFI has really done a lot is on nature. And I think there's been a lot of focus in recent years on climate, which is of course essential. But we're starting to see more organizations recognize the existential risk that the collapse in biodiversity and ecosystem services presents as well, but much earlier in then thinking through and being able to work out how to respond. So it's one of the areas that OFI won a Finance for the Future award in leadership on the work that you've been doing in nature. And I know you've done a lot to value natural capital. So can you share a little bit more of insight into why it's important for OFI, but also some of the practical tips that you might be able to share with others to help them take action?
Sure. No, I think, and it was a very proud moment to have won the recognition as well. And for us, like I said, in the food and for us, nature is very important, and it has a huge impact on what we do as an organization. And early on, and when I came back from the initial summit and that called for action, and I discussed with my CEO on what we could do as a company from finance standpoint, one of the priorities that we set together for ourselves was, how do we make ourselves future ready? And that came along with the ability to not just report on a sustainability aspect on what we're doing, but look at a broader set of drivers beyond financial capital. And this was to demonstrate how financial capital is linked to an underlying dependency on other capital like nature. And as you can imagine, and I've spoken about this in the past as well, for those who know our business, we are into farming as well. We got our own almond orchards, and the story of bees, which always resonates with most people, that how important is biodiversity. For most, bees are a pot of honey. But for us as a company, it was essential because the bees were needed for ensuring that we have a proper pollination happening. And as almond orchard owners, if we don't have the proper pollination happening, we would have a huge impact on our financial performance because bees are so critical to almonds being grown. And Einstein had said this many years back that if there were no bees, human race would go extinct. While it may be a little far-fetched, but important to understand the seriousness of biodiversity on our business. And there was a time when we saw that our productivity in our farms were going down. It was not as good as it should have been. And we realized that the bees, while we were spending a lot of money getting the beehives onto our farms and orchards, they were not doing what they should be doing because they were not in the natural habitat. And we worked very closely with various service providers and created a natural habitat in some of our orchards. And it was so heartening to see that our productivity in our farms just went up just by providing a natural habitat to the bees. So it made it very easy for us to understand that there's a clear financial link for doing good as well. And we tried to find out, is there a way and a tool that we can develop which looked at beyond the set drivers of financial capital. And this decision-making tool had to bring a financial link to sustainability and at the profit center level and increase our impact. Because as we can understand, and if we go back in time, business leaders understood only one language, dollars and cents, and in a format that was a profit, loss, and balance sheet. So the challenge that we set to ourselves was, can we create something which looks at the action on the ground in terms of dollars and cents, reported in a format that they understood? And that is where our whole approach to national capital accounting, multi-capital accounting came along. And that was a game-changing moment for us. And that was one of the reasons. And we were glad to not just create what we call our integrated impact statement, which looked beyond financial capital, valued nature differently. But the real action was not about trying to report on that. It was about the action that we took on the ground. And for me, it is very clear. And it also showed the power of finance and CFOs. Numbers do speak a language. And if you can draw that linkage, are able to demonstrate the value for what you're doing on the ground and action that you're taking, then even change becomes much easier. And we're very happy that we were recognized for what we did, and the award was well acknowledged, received by us. It was a good proof point for us as a company as well, and for my team as well, that what we were working on was acknowledged well on a global stage as well.
And if you think of, I mean, some of the challenges that are remaining for you as an organization, and then if you think of other companies who are just getting started in terms of thinking about how they value and protect and restore nature, and then really think in that kind of impact mindset, what would you see as the key challenges?
Yeah, no, so there is it is still an evolving journey. There is so much yet to be done. And the biggest challenge that as a company who's already done so much, and I keep saying, the more you know, you don't know enough, right? It is such an interesting thing, but also a challenging place. And the first and the biggest challenge is data, because we have never ever applied the same rigor that we apply to financial data as we have to apply on sustainability data as well. Unless you have the right baseline, unless you have the right data sets, it is very difficult to appreciate the action and then report upon that. And now with regulation coming in so strong and fast, it is important that every company, every CFO understands and puts in system processes to capture the data and report it in properly. The second is there's a lot of regulatory reporting requirements, rating requirements coming in, which is taking a lot of bandwidth. So the challenge is one about what you need to do as an organization, but second is what are you expected to do as well. So there needs to be, and while work is already happening on harmonization of reporting requirements, that also takes a lot of challenges and bandwidth from the finance organization. But for me, what is most important is the real and first priority, get the data right, get the processes on it. And second is use that for internal decision making, reporting will happen. While reporting is going to be a critical aspect of it, but it should not be reporting for the sake of reporting. If you make the right decisions, if you take the right steps, then reporting will become more an output like we do for financial statements today. So for me, that really are the two focus areas that every company like ours is still facing. We're using technology very differently now. We're trying to adapt and adopt to what challenges exist. and hopeful that in time to come, system processes and even reporting requirements and harmonization thereof will help us as we move forward.
Yeah, no, and I think that really resonates with me, because when we were first setting up the CFO Leadership Network, it was really focusing on that, the strategy, the decision making. And as you say, we've done a lot of work on reporting already, but we felt that there was a really big disconnect in terms of all of the actions that have to happen first before you have anything to report on. So I think that that's really, really good advice, and something that can be quite hard for organizations to keep a focus on at the moment when there is so much of a shift towards mandatory reporting. But I think that adopting that mindset will set people up well for success. If you think of the Finance for the Future Awards, one of the things that we try to do is to really put a spotlight on some of those stories of success, and use it to try and help inspire others. And we find that sharing examples is one of the best ways to do that. If you were advising people, the top tips that they should be thinking about if they're wanting to enter for the awards next year, can you say a bit about the recommendations that you would share to really help those examples shine?
Sure. Yeah, and the first and foremost is clearly the awards are an occasion to celebrate organizations and individuals who are really integrating and supporting sustainability into financial decision making. And for me, it is a very, very prestigious platform because it is one, independent. Second, as we all know, run in partnership between ICAEW, A4S, and Deloitte. It helps in showcasing achievements in a very different way. And I do encourage, I think the biggest risk that most companies or individuals will always perceive that they are not the best, so let's wait. And I think in this space, there's no best over here. It is about the best of what you are, right? And it is about showcasing your own journey, showcasing what you managed to achieve within the constraints that we're living within. So I actually encourage everybody to come forward and submit, because it is not only an ability to highlight your own successes, but also help others learn from your own. And like we've figured out for ourselves that you have to look at others and gain, adapt, and adopt. So when other companies come along and showcase their own journeys, they're actually helping others also understand their challenges and opportunities too. So I would encourage everybody, don't hope and wait that I could sharpen it much more, I could do much better at what I am. If you already made a start, you're already successful in showcasing that on a platform as well.
Fantastic. I think that's really really good advice, and I think that applies in a lot of other areas as well. Don't wait, don't hold back. You really need to push forward, which is a good segue into just looking ahead. So we know that there's a lot of progress being made, and I think you shared some really great examples of some of the progress that you've made, but not enough. And if you look at the environmental trends, and indeed some of the social trends as well, they're not going in the right direction yet, and time is running out, as His Majesty has underlined for us all many times. So what are the key actions you would recommend that as a finance and accounting community we should really be focusing on to accelerate progress over the next 2 decades?
Yeah, no, you're right. There is clearly call for action. Time is running out. Well, like I said in the past, there was an option not to get involved. Today we're at a stage, it is no longer an option. And unfortunately, it is a wrong way to put it, but the stick is on us as well. So it is important that we not just understand and appreciate the need, but really find out ways of creating value from that as well. And I always have maintained, as an organization, we have benefited by differentiating. And the differentiation from sustainability has only added value to us. Whether you look at from a business standpoint, it is making you much more sustainable. If you look at it from a lending standpoint, you're able to get more value for what you do. But last but not the least, as a purpose-led organization, there are employees who would only like to work for organizations that are forward-looking and sustainable, and with a purpose, not just about making profits. And that doing good aspect and the role of finance and CFO has only gotten more heightened. So I would actually encourage and urge everybody that rather than holding yourself back, try to learn from others, because one thing has also been important in this last few years and now a decade or so, that there is more tools available, there is more guidance available. So you're not alone. You're not starting from a position of no knowledge at all. We should all leverage on what already exists and then start moving in the right direction. So for me, the real aspect of change is that there is no better time than now. Don't wait for another opportunity. The opportunity exists, but the call for inaction is even more, much bigger. And I might even probably was to use some examples. So we set together a team strangely called Finance for Sustainability. It is obviously a takeoff on A4S in our own way of F4S. Have a CFO sustainability because clearly realize the power of finance. How do you integrate it in your organization? So don't waste time because it is a value proposition. It would be really my ask at this point in time.
So Rishi, those are some really great thoughts in terms of the future and in terms of what we might hope to achieve together. One thing we haven't touched on is for all of those accountants who are just getting going now. So can you say a bit more about the future leaders and what you're hoping to see from them?
Yeah, no, that's a good question that you ask, Jessica. And I don't want to call them future leaders. I want to call them the next leaders. So they are the ones who will really take the space and pace from all of us in times to come. And it is important that we are developing and getting them invested into sustainability from the word go. As you know, all of us much older and the older generation, so we pick this up on the fly and we realize the role and the importance and what needs to be done. But the next leaders have to be invested for now because one, there is a skill set that is needed. There's a big opportunity coming their way. And it is our responsibility to ensure that not just we upskill them, but ensure that they understand and appreciate what the future might look like. Because end of the day, we are helping them shape the future for themselves. The future that we are building up for, I don't know how many of us will be there when to see it through or not, but they will be the ones who will take the brunt or the advantage of what we are leaving behind for them. So it is equally important that at this stage, whether it is through university programs, the graduate schemes, or any program that we could develop, we are able to invest back into the society, develop and build up new and next leaders who, one, understand this, but can also tell us and guide us on what we should be doing today for the future of them in time to come.
Fantastic. And we look forward to, I think, working with you on how we can create some of those leaders. As you say, leadership comes from every level in an organization. So fantastic to work with so many leaders at the top, but also those generations coming through across the organization. Sadly, out of time, but if there's one final message that you wanted to leave everyone with in terms of what they should focus on, so that if we were having this conversation after A4S's 40th anniversary, we would be really looking back with pride that we had tackled some of the really major challenges that we face. What would that key message be?
I would reiterate what I have said in the past as well. Accountants can change mindset and drive action. And it is well demonstrated now. And I can say with a lot of pride that in an organization like ours, we have driven that change. And the power of numbers and the rigor that finance fraternity can bring in driving this change shouldn't be let to go waste. I've also been of a very strong believer in multi-capital accounting, which has to look beyond financial capital. And so numbers, it can't be backward looking, it has to be forward looking. And there's enough proof points now that CFOs in finance, and when we look at the value creation aspect, it's really about finance playing that role. So for me, it is about looking back 20 years forward, but looking 20 years back would be, I think we've come a long way, but CFOs really made any commitment that any company made on sustainability come to life. So really, it is the power of finance and numbers, which should see us through the next 20 years.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Rishi. Really great to hear your insights and your thoughts about how we can, continue that journey and accelerate into the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you and all the very best, Jessica and everybody else.
Thanks a lot, Rishi. Really great to get some of those insights. And I'm pleased to introduce our next speaker, Katie Murray. Katie is Chief Financial Officer of NatWest Group, and she's been at NatWest since 2015. She's a member of our CFO Leadership Network and has also led a lot of the work that the NatWest Group has done on net zero and tackling climate change, including overseeing the publication of the group's climate transition plan, one of the first UK banks to do so. Katie, it's really great to have you back with us for this year's summit.
It's lovely to be here, Jessica. Thanks for asking me.
If we can get started, I'd love to hear a bit more about your personal journey of how you've started to get involved in sustainable decision-making and action, and particularly around climate action and the role that businesses can play in driving sustainable outcomes.
Yeah, no, sure. So I mean, Jessica, it's always been a real passion, I guess, for me personally, and also for my kind of family kind of background. I think people who have heard me speak before will have heard me talk about that my sister's very senior within Greenpeace, and so we've always had that kind of narrative within the family, you know, and we try to lead a kind of very kind of ecological kind of life. Last year as a family, we had a commitment that we wouldn't do any flying, for example, on a family kind of purpose, which meant we did a lot more trains into Western Europe than we'd have kind of flown it. You know, people who also know me well would know that it's a balance of how do you kind of make those things kind of happy, but we try to kind of live a kind of a positive climate kind of life rather than one that's too negative. And these things, they're about balance as much as you can in any kind of thing. So I think my kind of family background and that kind of passion was there. I'm also, you know, a huge believer, and whether it's on climate or whether it's on kind of personal, people's kind of financial sustainability and things, that actually you can do more ultimately within organizations than without. And although my background may have been in a family basis much more about kind of, you know, trying to bring the issue to people's attention, that actually what those organizations have done have got it to people's attention, and actually now we need to make sure that we really drive it from within the organization. And I think then for NatWest, that's something in our own kind of journey is something that really came to the fore in about 2020, when we really kind of put out this very purpose kind of led strategy, and we put climate as one of the key tenets within there. You know, and that was driven by a couple of different things. One, I think a real understanding that actually business had a really important place to important role to play within it, but also within the UK, the regulator, you know, the regulatory agenda was really developing. We obviously had Mark Carney at that point, who was the chair and head of the Bank of England, and he was putting pressure on banks, particularly to say, look, what will climate reporting do for us? And at the beginning, I think people found that really kind of hard, is that, well, why is the regulator pushing us to do that? But actually it was brilliant, because it meant that you had to do regulatory submissions, and there would be flaws and challenges in all of those submissions and things, but it really just meant boards really had to think about it, because they had to sign up to some of those things. And also we had disclosure requirements around TCFD. And the good thing about disclosure requirements is you actually have to have something to disclose. So I think those things were things that were kind of putting the pressure on. And then as a bank and under Alison Rose's kind of leadership, it was really to say, well, actually, we want this to be a key tenet of our strategy, because we believe that not only is it the right thing to do for the planet, but actually we can see it as a really important commercial opportunity for us as a bank, as people go through that transition process. How can we be with them and beside them and advising them, and then obviously funding and financing their transition to make sure we were kind of getting the right kind of outcomes. I think those things all kind of help us to why it was important to really deliver. And then for me as the finance director, you know, you then actually have to publish a TCFD report, or now a transition document, and you know, we've been doing them consistently from the sort of year end 2020, and then that means you have to be able to chart your progress within there. Those of us watching this, you know, in finance, we know that publishing P&Ls and balance sheets and all of those notes, those things they're our bread and butter. We do them really well. But actually this climate stuff, it was all completely different. The metrics were different. The calculations were unbelievably complicated. And actually we had to really learn how to do those things, how to make sure they were really well controlled, so that what we published was something we felt safe about, but then also to really kind of think about, you know, how do you deal with when you're publishing numbers when there isn't an official standard, or there is a standard, but you know the rules will change because we'll learn more in the next couple of years. And I think those have been some of the areas where I've had to provide real kind of leadership with the teams, but also with the board, to sort of say, look, I know that they're not perfect, I know that we'll change them, but this is how we'll kind of move our way forward to kind of really develop some of those kind of measurement activities. And it is an absolute truth, it's not one size fits all. The climate impacts for the UK mortgage area is completely different from the climate impacts of gas or oil producers that we may kind of help. And in the middle of that, you've got big commercial real estate issues, you've got small businesses starting up. So actually you've got to develop things that your relationship managers can talk about to their customers that cover, I mean, every industry in the country. And that's been really exciting to kind of be involved and watch those kind of journeys. But getting that together, working out how the data kind of evolves, working out how you work with those different customers to come up with something that is helpful, I think is been a real kind of personal journey. And I do think it's one that is really important we continue. And ultimately, from working within the system and working with companies, I think we can be really impactful over the medium and longer term.
I think that really helps to throw some insights into why you've been engaging. I think both really interesting that your sister and you have taken clearly very different directions, but to have impact in very profound and as I say, different ways. If you look at the role of the CFO, you've alluded to some of the drivers of why that as CFO and as a finance team, you might have been involved in leading some of the work that the bank has done to respond. Can you say a bit about how it's changing the role of the CFO, whether it's around mindset, around tools and approaches that you've seen, whether for yourself, but also looking at your peers?
Yeah, no, look, it's definitely, things have changed a lot, you know, I think as the CFO. And if I think you know, there's always lots of narrative about the changing kind of face and shape of CFOs. And we cover, the lovely thing about being a CFO is that ultimately you cover everything in the bank. You know, it's something, it's everywhere, it's got a cost and output and input, and actually you get to touch everything, which is what's really exciting, because actually you can go and talk about anything. There's no door is closed to you. So I guess that's why I really kind of like it. I think the thing that was really important about climate and also nature as well is that these are areas that, you know, they're very different. They're very different from the physical assets that you touch and the kind of way you think about. I mean, I'm a bank, so I don't have stock and I don't have inventory. But, you know, how do I think about physical assets or how do I think about financial assets and their kind of valuations? But you look at these things and you're making decisions that are, you know, multi-year. You don't really know the impact of them. You don't really know if they'll work, but you do know that they have to be valued and measured and that we have to track some kind of progression. You know, and I would think if I look historically at the CFO kind of world, you would have kind of sort of said, well, those non-financial disclosures, somebody else could deal with them. But I think what you come to quite quickly is if somebody else deals with them, actually they don't have the training that we have as financial professionals. And to be able to really make sure that you have really high quality metrics and benchmarks that you can chart your progress against and that you can take on a journey of a multi-year kind of development, I think is something that really fits well with the finance the kind of finance world. And I think at the beginning, what we often did was we kind of popped it into the sustainability department. But actually what became quite clear, and this is no disrespect to them, but they weren't people who are trained in how do they wrangle data together, how do they get models to work, how do they kind of produce things that are auditable quality, and then you can kind of really take forward. So actually what I've found is that within finance, I used to be very responsible just for the finance numbers, so capital, P&L, balance sheet. But actually what we've really added is all of those non-financial and those softer kind of metrics, because what we see is that the rigor that a finance function can bring to them and the challenge it can bring to them, and really kind of holding up that picture of, we said we would do this, but we're only doing that. And I understand the base might have changed and things like that, but actually are we moving forward or backwards has been, I think, something we've really seen within our organization has really changed. And I've also seen that within the peer groups where you see a huge amount of this, where it might have been in risk because of the regulatory returns we were doing, or it might have been in sustainability that actually is drifting much more into the kind of finance production kind of world, just because it needs actually that really particular skill set that finance professionals can really bring to kind of managing. So I do think it's something that has really changed, but it has brought periods of discomfort, because actually those other things are very well understood. You know what the numbers will be to a large extent. You can look at them and know that they're wrong or right, you know, quite easily, because it's just that's been your bread and butter. And actually this has brought kind of different aspects, which I think has also been really exciting, and something that a lot of my finance teams have really enjoyed, kind of having to learn how to take their skills and apply it to kind of some very, very kind of different topics. You know, when I talk to my kind of peer group, I can see them on that kind of journey as well.
And if you think of the involvement that you've had in the A4S CFO Leadership Network, I think you it's been a few years now and your team are very heavily involved. Can you say a little bit about some of the values or the insights that you've drawn from working with others in that kind of way?
Because I think for me, it's been really fundamental, actually. And it's one of the frustrations, Jessica, is I always like to give more time than I'm able to give, because I think actually the more time when you spend time on it, it's just been really important for me, personally, but also to the team. We do things like we try to be supportive and share our case studies and our experiences and what we've kind of learned. We've used your A4S Academy. I would put as many people through there as you'd allow me to, quite frankly. I think it's been brilliant training and has really kind of worked. And I think we've had people in your cohorts all the way through since kind of 2020. And I just think learning from others and how they're doing it. And if I look at it, people like the CFO of Burberry, they felt so far ahead from when I was talking. I was like, oh, I've such a long way that I need to go. Some of those retail businesses, I think because they'd had to deal with kind of child labour and child production and all kind of issues way before they even got to this, they kind of were able to talk about this so much more cogently than I felt that I could. So I think there really was such a kind of a learning from what others had done and where they were. And then also they're a really good kind of networking opportunity, and many of them would also be my customers, in different ways. And then to actually hear from them saying, Katie, dropping on like a 20 gig Excel spreadsheet on me to try to work out my carbon isn't something that's helpful to me at all. And so it also allowed us to kind of go, well, actually, we're trying to do this measurement. I've got 2,500 people in my finance function. I can score out a few of them to kind of deal with that. But if I'm a smaller business or a mid-sized business, actually, I don't know how to do it. And I don't know how to kind of really develop and really kind of measure that kind of impact. So to kind of go, well, if that's what they're saying to me as customers, this is my experience, and I'm looking at and it was actually Burberry that really was like, oh my Lord, they're so far ahead of me. That if I'm looking at them and what they've done, how is there a role that we can kind of play to kind of help our customer base kind of accelerate along a little bit as well? So I think that was really kind of helpful. And it's one of those things when you have an event, you say, oh, I've got to go to this now, I'm so busy, blah, blah, blah. And I always know that when I come and I make the time, I get such huge benefit from it, because I hear the stories that others are doing and can really learn from their conversations. So although we try to be active, we're only kind of being as active as we are, because we know that we've learned from others who've kind of dealt with different issues and that we can really benefit from their experiences. So, I do think what A4S has done, and the quiet pressure that you just gently apply to make sure that we're continuing to develop our kind of quarterly goals and kind of moving forward, I think it has been really revolutionary for us. Just very quietly in the background, but it's given certainly a lot of credibility as I talk to the board and as I talk to others. So very, very grateful for what you have done and the challenge that you put to us, but also what we've been able to contribute back in a small way to kind of help others who are coming along behind us as well.
And I think that example you gave of telling some of those stories is at the heart of what we do through the Finance for the Future Awards as well, working with ICAEW and Deloitte. And of course, I think you're being slightly modest, because of course NatWest I think swept the board in terms of the categories last year.
They must be said, yeah. So.
And I think what really stood out for the judges was the leadership around climate and net zero and transition plans, and how you'd really embedded that into decision making, really leveraging the power of finance, and then being able to communicate that to investors and other stakeholders. So I'd love to hear you share a bit more about the approach that you've adopted to developing your transition plan and your net zero commitments, and how that's really embedded into the strategy, the decision making within NatWest.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So look, our transition plan is very much focused on our 2030, our scope 3 emissions, and they arise from lending to our customers. And that everyone will have complexity, and that's certainly given complexity to us, because I make a loan to you, Jessica, and you tell me you're going to do this, and I really hope you're going to do what you tell me, but life gets in the way, and sometimes you might not do exactly as I said, or you might not make the progress that you'd hope to kind of make in that piece. So I think that's caused us to work really closely with our customers, so that we can then kind of say, actually, is your scope 3 emission what we thought it might be? Have you been able to use the money that we lent you, or really in the right way that you had planned to? And then how do we kind of make sure that, I guess, we apply kind of that gentle encouragement as well, to make sure that we do kind of move things forward? And sometimes we do that through discounts on rates, or other times we do it on working with you to kind of build your own kind of transition plans. But we've really kind of tried to be quite kind of systematic in how we've developed that transition plan. And I think our approach has changed as well as we've kind of gone through, you know, the initial first transition plan that we kind of published, and that kind of initial assessment, and lots of debates about how do you really show progress. And there's some line graph documents that we all have, which are really important, but the bubbles are always moving in the wrong direction, and it's not a straight path. So I think really kind of learning and developing why it's never going to be a straight line. So don't worry about it not being a straight line. Just make sure it's a line that's kind of moving in the direction that you are. And I think, you know, one of the big challenges and the big debates we had of this year's plan was to actually say that the government hasn't moved as well or as far as we'd like it to do for other reasons, and for reasons that we can all kind of understand. So not being necessarily critical of them, but to say, well, our movement forward is dependent upon government policy movement forward. And actually, how do we kind of deal with things that aren't maybe going as far? And, you know, the Committee for Climate Change, the government committee, has also been quite open that actually we're not necessarily making the progress we're there. So what does that mean to our targets? How do we talk about that in the plans as well? And how do we not run away? How do you make sure you don't run away from those targets, while at the same time recognising actually the targets which were hard anyway, for some reasons might have been a little bit harder. So I think just kind of really trying to balance that. How do you build it into your plan? So we set plans, our relationship managers have all been trained, they understand that their lending is now both assessed on kind of probability of default, so will someone repay or not repay, and also actually what it does in terms of their carbon piece, and accepting it's not going to go from, I quite like talking about it in colours, it's not going to go from a kind of sludgy brown loan to a bright green brilliant loan. It's just going to move very gently to the right. And actually, how do we transition people and really work with them as they move gently to the right? And I think one of the things that I think we didn't appreciate at the beginning, as well as we might have done, and it feels very naive to talk about it now, is that businesses grow and change. And actually, I want to grow my lending book. And if you baseline your lending book at this point and you say you want to take out X amount of kind of half the impact of that carbon book in that time, what I don't think we thought about it enough was actually by 2030, our lending book is going to be that much bigger. And so actually half was also that much bigger. And how do you deal with that so that you don't kind of shrink to greatness? And I think that's been a really big kind of learning for us in this whole debate about, is it intensity or output that you're measuring, and how to kind of deal with that. And I think the other thing that we've kind of looked about is just, you know, what we've really realised and really learned, and again, it feels naive now, but we didn't really appreciate it at the beginning, was how much, you know, what we did in this sector of lending impacted what we did in this sector of lending, because actually their scope 3 was this person's scope 2, and actually it's much more kind of connected. And I think we've tried to kind of understand that a bit more than we really did when we kind of started this journey. So it's really, you know, we've done our TCFD report, we've now done 2 issues of our climate transition plan, and I think we've learned so much from that first document of actually what are we trying to do as a business. And importantly, the business has learned, because I can only produce, you know, a great story if the business has done a great story, and they've really kind of learned and kind of moved forward in that space.
And then, so it's great to hear some of those examples and the practical challenges, and then some of the things that you've been doing to overcome them, and that learning and continuous learning. Collectively, we know that we're not on track, or far from on track when it comes to climate and climate action. As a business, one of the things that really stood out to the Finance for the Future judges was definitely the way that you are thinking about things in quite a systemic way, and the different points of influence that you might have as an organisation. Can you say a little bit more about your thinking there, and then where you see the biggest opportunities for us to kind of work together to fast track action so that we do address climate?
Yeah, no, sure. So look, what we've done is as we progressed on the work on the transition, we definitely moved much more to a systems approach. And you can see that in our document from kind of the first issue to where we are now. And to really look across the kind of value chain. And I think a really great example is some of the work we've done within the agricultural sector. And that's whether we're working with farmers so that they can work out what their carbon impact is of their farm. I think it's been really important. But then also some of the partnerships we've entered into with things like McCain Foods and Tesco's, so that we can provide loans at discounted rates for McCain's potato farmers to adapt to their sustainable farming practices. And then ultimately that then goes into how they actually then deliver to their point of sale in terms of Tesco's out there. We've also been working with Supply Chain Sustainability School to really support training for construction industry to kind of support the home retrofits. And so that goes from the people who are applying the retrofit materials to people who are installing, to the homes that are using it, and actually saying there are lines here that we're all consumers of each other's, and actually how do we then make sure that the way that we are investing or the way that we're developing can really kind of work that kind of integration across the kind of commercial systems in the country. And then ultimately we've then worked to try to get that to kind of work with the transition plan. So you can kind of see that we'll have X number of sectors that we work with, and this one is connected to that one and connected to that one. And I think also, Jessica, it's been important not to try to boil the ocean, which I think has been really key for us, because we can't do all the sectors at the same time. So kind of work out which ones you can have greatest impact and which ones you can really measure. And then who's also got the right kind of appetite from different customers to really kind of take them forward as well.
And if you think of some of the tips that you would share with others who might be earlier in their journey around developing a transition plan, really embedding it into and leveraging finance to help embed and then report, what would those tips be?
I think I probably talk about them in three kind of buckets. The first one is involve the business teams. Don't try to do it in your finance department without them, because they know, whether you're in manufacturing or whether you're somebody who deals with the kind of customer base, they understand where the emissions are coming from. They know what's in their system. They know the challenge that they've had. So, and they also know they know more about it than you do at the kind of coalface. So really involve the business team. For me, the really important thing was to align the transition plan with the financial plan. So don't do your financial plan and then 4 months later say, oh, and now we're going to back solve that into a transition plan. Make it, as they present things, that they present, here's my financial lending pieces, these are my costs of risk, these are my climate pieces, so it becomes part of an integrated conversation. And I think that's been really important for us. And I think the third thing is really transparent disclosure. One of the things that I see boards getting anxious about is because you're making targets and statements on things that actually you can't, you don't know that the end's going to work in that way. And, you know, one of the things I say a lot is disclosure is our friend. If we tell people what we have done and how we've done it and what we think not the failures, but the drawbacks of those processes are, they can make their own decision. So I think really for me, it's those things: involve the business team, align your transition plan with the financial plan, and really transparent disclosure of what you are doing, and sometimes some of the challenges within that.
I think that one of the areas of focus with the CFO Leadership Network this year is going to be on that whole question of financial planning and how to align and embed that as part of the transition plan. So I'm sure that we're going to be drawing on a lot of the work that you, Katie, and your team have been doing on that front. Now we're nearly out of time, but just thinking back to the Finance for the Future Awards, can you share any recommendations of what they should be thinking about for others who might be wanting to enter?
So, I mean, I think the most important thing is to apply, actually, which seems very kind of simple, but actually the process of application has helped us to kind of, when you're filling in and going through it, to help us think, actually, this is how we can improve and do better next time. So use that process of application as a real kind of way to kind of challenge your thinking. And also the Finance for the Future Awards is a really great opportunity to hear and see the success stories of other organisations. And yeah, my team did very well, but they came away really impressed with that. Oh, we didn't do that and they did this and we can learn from that. So it's a great opportunity, you know, to steal ideas. I'm a big believer in stealing other people's ideas and learning from them. So, and this kind of offered a really great opportunity to do that.
And just as a final remark, AFRES is obviously 20 years old this year. So if we were to fast forward 20 years into the future and then look back, what would you have hoped that collectively as a finance and accounting community we would have achieved, so that we were in where we need to be when it comes to climate, nature, people?
So I guess one of the things, Jessica, would be those little graphs I talked about, that they were much more closer to the line that I was drawing rather than where they were. obviously that we'd kind of made the progress. But I think for me, as a kind of finance professional piece, is that this is just part of the language of all of our finance professionals. The same way so many things that they do today are just part of our language. I'd like to see that it was much more embedded in the training that we give at colleges and universities. It was much more part of the kind of professional qualifications, the way that we see data coming much more into those qualifications in AI, that they should have really good sessions on kind of climate, and it's just part of what we do. The thing that always kind of frustrates me around some of the climate conversations, people talk about, oh, we've got this purpose and we've got this ambition, and I'm like, yeah, but I just want to see it as part of your normal day-to-day language, because when it's part of your normal day-to-day language, I know that it's really just part of what you do in the organization. And I think for me, that's kind of where I would hope that we would be at, that it's just part of what we do. And what we do today, we get results from what we do. If it's part of what we're talking about just normally, in 20 years' time, we'll be getting the results that we all really want to get from it.
Fantastic. Well, that's a great, very clear call to action, Katie. So thanks a lot for sharing your insights, and look forward to putting some of those challenges to Alan as CEO of ICAEW, who's going to be speaking next.
No, I look forward to make him get this embedded into his training in a really meaningful way. Lovely. Thanks very much, and great to be with you today as well. Thanks, Jessica.
Thanks a lot, Katie. Thanks again, Katie. And for our final speaker for this session, I'm pleased to introduce Alan Vallance, the Chief Executive Officer of ICAEW. Alan has just started at ICAEW, so fresh in this role. He's previously been the Chief Executive of the Chartered Insurance Institute and has worked with the professional finance and insurance community for a number of years. He was previously Chief Executive of the Royal Institute of British Architects and also Group COO at the Law Society. And prior to that, which is experience that I'm sure is helping to shape some of the work that he might do on sustainability now, he was COO at the Australian Weather Bureau. So welcome, Alan. Looking forward to hearing from you.
Great to be here, Jessica. Thank you.
You've taken over as CEO of ICAEW pretty recently, and I know that one of your strategic priorities is sustainability. Now, of course, earlier in your career, you spent time at the Australian Weather Bureau, so had first-hand experience of some of the impacts of the climate and on weather. But
Yes.
also, of course, from a financial services perspective, you've seen that, I'm sure, impact the response from a number of professions. Can you say a bit about why you see it as so critical for the finance and accounting professional, why it's core to your strategy now?
Well, what a great question. So I was the deputy head of the Australian Weather Bureau in 2009 to 2011, and it was a fascinating period. You know, I qualified as a chartered accountant, and I've kind of journeyed around the world and back, and I think those skills are so transferable. But being at the Weather Bureau for a couple of years was really a fantastic experience, but really brought home to me the impact of climate change. I worked with the scientists, the climatologists, meteorologists, and it was really, really educational time for me, but it's left a huge imprint on me since that time. So we were dealing with natural events, so, you know, weather issues, floods, cyclones. But I do remember one particular time when we had two states, Queensland and New South Wales, had huge flooding, and it led to a terrible tragedy, the Lockyer Valley in Queensland, where 30 or so people lost their lives, and huge numbers of properties were flooded and ruined. But at the same time, we had bushfires in 3 states. We had the Fukushima tsunami and then subsequent radioactive cloud. And we even had a plague of locusts in one of the states in Australia. So it literally was biblical. And it was really interesting in the sense of once that event had ended. But you could almost see the organisation's infrastructure creaking, equipment was damaged, but the team carried on. And I took away from that a kind of really, you know, this is climate change for real. And I also, as a senior sort of public servant, had to present to the Australian Parliament, so through their upper house, the Senate. And I remember one particular experience where a senator who was in the opposition asked my boss, I was one of the 4 deputy directors, and we were all sitting there, and he said to my boss, "Great, Dr. Ayres, it's clear in the Bible that the temperature was hotter in the time of Christ than it is today. How can climate change be real?" So pitting religion, science, and politics in one forum, really the height of climate skepticism. So that was a pretty powerful experience, and that whole 2 years was wonderful. But it's really something I've taken through. So I am very passionate about sustainability more broadly, but particularly coming from that event. And over the last 10 years, since I've returned to the UK, I've run professional bodies, but particularly that experience has come through in many different ways. So at the RIBA, where I ran the Institute of Architects, the whole built environment, carbon, concrete, embedded carbon, all that sort of stuff. There was a lot of work that we did to actually set the profession up to understand more about sustainability and the impact of construction on the built environment and carbon and all those sorts of things. Same at the CII, Chartered Insurance Institute, which was much more looking at the impact of climate events, so how climate risk is managed. And all of that's led into bringing that forward back into my own profession now at ICAEW, where I've been really impressed with the amount of work we've been doing at the Institute, but also in collaboration with A4S, and doing it on a global scale as well. And I'm very keen, I know my predecessor, Michael Itzer, was as well, to really make sure the organisation's at the forefront of supporting and leading the profession into the sustainability issues more broadly. So it's something that very passionate about, Jessica, and really want to lead from the front and make sure the Institute does that.
I look forward to hearing more about some of the insights and the work and where you feel the profession can really play that part. It's of course at the heart of A4S's mission since inception, as well. And it's been really great to work with ICAEW around a number of different areas, but including the Finance for the Future Awards. And I think when we started them back in 2012, the world was still quite a different place, and examples like the one that you shared, there was still a lot of skepticism out there, and particularly a lot of questions that we received around why accountants, why finance, what role can we really play? It was often seen as somebody else's responsibility that you might support, but not something you could do in your day-to-day. So with the awards, we really wanted to celebrate success, put a spotlight on some of the stories of action so that we could help to inspire others. And actually in the conversations from this session earlier with Rishi and Katie, I think they shared some of those stories and why it's so important to celebrate success. I think now, fast forward 12 years, that we don't really get asked that question around the why so much. It's very much a focus on the how. So could you share a bit more about where you see the impact that Finance for the Future Awards in the future can have, and how they can really continue to drive an impact?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was fantastic to find out about the awards and the work that our organisations have been doing together in that regard. I think it's really, and I'm glad to hear you say that we've moved from the why to the how. Certainly when I was doing my work 12 or so years ago, whenever it was definitely, well, here's why, but nobody was necessarily listening and accepting that. So the world has moved on. But the clock is also ticking, and I think that's really important to know. There's a whole range of things that I talked about, transferable skills. So, as a chartered accountant, when I was at the Weather Bureau, I was helping scientists put together proposals for investment for climate services in poorer countries, countries that were subject to low-lying flooding impacts, particularly in the Pacific. So immediately, there are skills that chartered accountants, when they learn and become qualified, those skills are transferable, and I'll use those skills in that direct context. But more broadly, I think in the profession, for over a century, accountants and chartered accountants have been the go-to profession for financial assurance. And I think there is a huge opportunity for us to be the leaders in non-financial assurance, whilst accepting that there are lots of different experts that need to come along and play their part. But the formative training of an accountant, the skills that they learn, not just in financial accounting as such, but essentially measuring, reporting the impact initially of financial levers, but now much more into non-financial areas. I think it's really critical. But equally, their ability, to present a case for change, I think it's critical. If they're working at very senior levels of the organisation, as lots of them are, they're at the table having the conversations. They're part of the leadership team driving change, and that's absolutely brilliant. But they bring to the table a whole host of skills around professional judgment, critical, constructive challenge. I think is really important as well as we get into the why are we doing this? What's the impact on sustainability? So I think there's a whole host of people who are working in business more broadly as accountants can bring to the table. And I think the other opportunity is also around assurance. How is the profession going to assure sustainability as it's measured more broadly going forwards? And right now, some of the big challenges are simply around the fact there are a number of different sets of standards around the world. So there's a whole conversation about how they can be kind of harmonised or converge, but how assurance is validated in the future. And I think the fact that the awards can cover all of those sorts of things, as well as other things too, I think is absolutely brilliant. But essentially, to me, recognition of people who are doing great things, but particularly the how. How are we doing this? Because it shines a light on what good looks like. It inspires other people to act, and it also provides really tangible examples of best practice, pathways to follow, and things that are kind of scalable and replicable as well, so we can actually fast track what the sort of profession's trying to do to face up to the sustainability challenge more broadly.
That really highlights, Alan, I think, both the importance of the role of individuals and the change that each of us need to drive, as well as how important it is to put a spotlight on the stories of action and change that organisations as a whole are having. And that's really the focus for this year's set of awards. For 2025 awards, which you can register your interest for now, we are refreshing the categories. So walking through the award categories for this year, the first is CFO of the Year. So we really want to celebrate a finance leader who is driving positive change through their role. Secondly is Rising Star, looking at individuals who are in the early stages of their career within finance teams who are demonstrating their commitment to action and driving leadership within their current role. Lifetime Achievement Award, those who are probably at the other end of their careers, but who have already had enormous impact and made a profound change to sustainability and sustainable outcomes through their role in finance and as a finance leader. The fourth category is Finance for the Future's Team of the Year. And this is to recognise that it's not all about individuals. We have to have action as a team. So we're looking for either a finance team or a team within the finance sector who has really led on successfully embedding sustainability into the heart of their organisation's strategy and decision making. And the fifth and final category is Finance Changemakers. This is recognising individuals or initiatives which are driving change through the finance teams, finance community more broadly, through education and training, or the creation of innovative products and services. Now, in addition to those 5 categories, we also want to celebrate leadership across the following areas, looking for ideas, inspiration, and role models. So those who are really leading across all of the different aspects of finance in terms of climate outcomes, nature, social or people impacts, and communicating integrated thinking. So please do enter the categories now or register your interest, and you will be able to stay up to date. And we look forward to hearing those stories of your success. Alan, if I can ask you, reflecting on those categories and areas of leadership, can you share a bit more about what you would be looking for from those hoping to enter and potentially win the awards?
Well, Jessica, I mean, I firstly just encourage people to enter. It's a brilliant opportunity for achievement to be recognised. I think that's the first point. And it's good to see that we're recognising individuals and teams more broadly, but there's so many aspects to this. Everybody can play a part, as you say, whether you're a young professional starting out or you're coming towards the end of your career. Everybody's got a part to play, and everybody can play a part. And I think it's brilliant that we've got a wide range of opportunities for people to consider being recognised for. I think it goes back to some of the things we were talking about a little bit before. We've moved away from the why and we're now into the how. But what we're really interested in is people demonstrating impact, moving on from the promises and the commitments that have been made, but actually tangible action. And we've seen in recent years, I think, a lot of developments in terms of the ISSBs being, developed, other standards as well. But the work that Transition Plan Task Force has been doing, out of all of that and many other things, what's coming out is evidence of action. For those people who are voluntarily adopting standards, they're very keen to understand how other organisations are doing it. They're looking around for examples and evidence. So effectively, what we're really about is saying, let's see tangible action and outcomes. And it's about all of the capitals. It's not just financial. It's the things that are in the category. So it's brilliant to see then we've broadened into nature, climate, biodiversity more broadly. So we're really looking for groundbreaking stuff as well. So across each of those capitals, what are the groundbreaking opportunities that we can share with the world, that we can scale, we can replicate? How quickly can we do this? Because the clock, as I said before, is really ticking. So we're really looking for sort of shining stars of brilliant things that have been done. It might not in itself shine brightly, but it actually fundamentally is going to make a significant change to the systemic approach that we need to take, because one of the things I take from my old Weather Bureau days is the fact that climate is a global phenomenon, is what they say in the science community. It's not something that an individual can solve by him or herself, but by sharing what they're doing to so many more people through things like the awards, actually you can then start to scale up the response and have that impact. So there's a whole host of brilliant things that we would expect to see and we hope to see. But essentially it's about impact and it's about change.
And I think that example around the innovations when it comes to the leadership categories, we always award more than one, because as you say, it's a whole load of different types of actions by all of us that are needed to get the kind of systemic change that we need.
Right.
Now, a final question. This is AFRES's 20th anniversary. So looking ahead 20 years, what kind of actions and leadership would you be hoping to have seen and indeed have played a part in driving, that means that the profession really has played its part in achieving a sustainable future?
Well, firstly, happy birthday to A4S this year. I actually think there's a more immediate, I think about the end of 2030. I mean, that's one of the things in my more immediate medium term time. So we can talk about 20 years time, but the end of 2030 is only 5.5 years away. So I think having that conversation probably sooner rather than later is important. But I think that we've made a difference. If I look back to the work that I did, one of the frustrations of being in the science community at that time was that the evidence was there and we weren't seeing the action. So I think if you compared the development of financial reporting standards, which essentially started out in the 1970s, and it's taken 50 years for it to fully evolve, I think we've got to ramp up the pace in terms of sustainability, because we don't have 50 years to make that difference. So in 20 years' time, if we come back together again and do another one of these conversations, I think we would be looking in the rearview mirror saying, we addressed it. We did have a substantial material impact, and it made a difference to the planet. I also think that the profession will look back on itself with pride, saying we made that leap from the traditional financial assurance world into a much broader role for the profession. And we consider in all of our decisions, sustainability more broadly. We don't have to be reminded to do that, we just do it. And the professions have evolved to such an extent that success, I think, is probably, you don't need to talk about it anymore because it's already happening. It's just part of what you do. So that might mean we might not have to have a conversation at all because it's all sort of done and dusted. But I think that whole world of financial and non-financial reporting and assurance is completely and seamlessly integrated. That the information is high quality, that the evidence and the advice is trusted from the profession, and it's completely incorporated into a holistic evidence decision-making process.
I think that aligns perfectly with some of the words that Katie was sharing earlier, and indeed with AFRES's our core purpose, which is really to make sustainable business as usual. So I think if we can get there, we certainly need to. Hopefully there won't need to be any need for AFRES in 20 years' time. And as you say, the next 5 years really are critical.
Definitely.
So I'll look forward to everyone's registration and to share more around the awards. Please do, as Alan has highlighted, it's really important to put a spotlight on some of the examples of action. As Katie shared earlier, even applying helps you to think through some of the impacts that you've had as an individual, as a team, and as an organisation. So do go ahead and register your interest. And thanks a lot, Alan, for sharing all of those insights, both from your own journey and around ICAEWs.
You're very welcome, Jessica. Thank you for having me on board.
Huge thanks again to Alan and Katie and Rishi for sharing all of those fantastic insights. I look forward to welcoming you back for the next session in today's AFRES Summit, which is going to be a spotlight on the science. And I'll be speaking to Professors Emily Shukbra and Tim Lenton, looking at the latest trends and how we can create the kind of action that we need to see for a sustainable future. So look forward to welcoming you back at 10 o'clock UK time and whatever that time is around the world where you are. Thanks a lot.